So we're going to shift a little bit and kind of move more towards a knowledge-aware type conversation, or a talk rather. And it's going to be Mr. Craig Brown. Craig has 40 years of experience in systems engineering, both in automotive and aerospace. He manages engineering and IT teams developing tools to improve product engineering. These teams have received patents, engineering awards, and records of inventions. Craig received GM's Boss Kettering Award in 2003 using OnStar to monitor and report vehicle diagnostics. The acquisition of knowledge applied across product portfolios is key to the next wave of product lifecycle management. Craig was appointed the GM PLM leader in September of 2012. He became PLM World's community director in 2015. He retired from GM in early 2019 and looks forward to helping others apply their knowledge, experiences, and wares into the digital enterprises of the future. So, Craig?
Thank you. Am I on? You can hear me. Okay, good. Okay. Okay. Good morning, everybody. It's interesting to be back here. I've been here many, many times, and when you retire, you get the opportunity to reflect, and I've been doing a lot of that since February. And I've also been asked by a few folks, including Jeff, to come present at their conferences on some of the things I learned, and also on some of the things that I think you should know from a PLM leader's point of view. So that's why I agreed to do this. Along the way, I joined SimData. If you don't know who they are, you can Google it while I'm chatting and you'll figure it out. But I'll give you one moment of advertisement and then we'll get into the talk for the day. I, at the moment, do manage a couple teams, or I should say I advise them on tool development. I was recruited by one company and I've been asked through SimData to help a couple others. So to my friends at GM, there are several in the room, and there's one from Caterpillar that used to be a GM. Yeah, I'm struggling. I'm failing at retirement. It's really good that Sanjay pointed out failure is good because that's how you learn. But yeah, I don't work full time, to be really clear. So here we go. Well, SimData. Well, I've known SimData for decades, and when I started thinking about, well, how do I want to end this career? How do I want to go into this partial working phase? I thought a lot about, well, I just want to share what I know. And I want people to have an opportunity to quiz me about it and maybe learn from it. And so SimData actually called me in April, I think it was, and said, hey, please come speak at our conference in Washington. There's a lot of folks in the Department of Defense who are now trying to figure out how to do real PLM innovation and insist on it rather than kind of the haphazard way they were doing it. So I did that. I found out I really enjoyed it. And then I was asked over the summer for a couple other conferences. I continue to enjoy it, and so I'm looking forward to today's discussion. If you think we can help you from SimData's point of view, please just give me a call. If you'd like a card, I have cards. But I'm also not here to talk about that. I'm actually here to talk about us a little bit. So is the polling set up? I guess I don't know how this works. So if you have your app, can you please, and then you're going to show me the results, right, I hope. Can you please just tell me what role you have in the company? Are you a designer? Oh, here we go. Perfect. Go ahead. Let's go. I don't know how long this will last. What's your practice, Jeff, to give them a few minutes? Okay, well, while you're giving a few minutes, the reason I like polls is I'd like to understand who I'm talking to. And at the moment, I'm talking to nobody. This is great. Okay. Oh, we got some engineers. That's good. It's not a PLM leader. I can't type. It's a PLM lead. Different companies have different roles. Some of them call them chief engineers. I was called a PLM leader. I had budget responsibility and long-term planning responsibility. Okay, we're still getting trends. Oh, more people are coming in. Why is the IT department not here? Think about that. I might have some insight before the end. Okay. Oh, still one more. If I see delta in total votes, I'll keep talking and let you guys finish. Okay, I got over half of you are engineers. Many of you are process leaders. I think I have key points for both of you. The couple of you that are PLM leaders, it's really important you appreciate why Auros works, and I am going to talk about that. And to the brave IT builder in the room, if you have questions, I'll be glad to chat with you before I leave today. I'm here all day. I do think IT departments need to have some better insight as to why this works so well. Okay, well, we got a lot of people, and I'm going to run out of time. So engineer, I got my audience. Let me go to the next question. What part of your day are you using knowledge? Sanjay gave a lot of examples about learning from failures. That's a form of knowledge. Best practice is another form of knowledge. So let's go back to the survey. I want to see how many of you use knowledge. Interesting. You know, when I was in high school and in middle school, the way you got knowledge was go to a local library and start wading through encyclopedias and maybe news articles, and if you could find a really good book on a topic, that would help. But you kind of relied on the encyclopedia being the source. Today, people probably Google or one of the other search engines and rely on things like Wikipedia as the source. It's interesting. So one of the goals I have in today's discussion is that more of you move up to the A and B category. We got about half of you there. If you're not spending over 70% of your day with knowledge, then it must mean you have some kind of job that requires you to do a lot of searching for information and moving stuff around, and it may not be value added from your point of view. Okay, let's go to the last question. And finally, I want to know how many people are using Auros. I want to know if I'm talking to an experienced audience or if I'm talking to folks that are curious about Auros. So let's see what the results say. Let's try to do this one in like 2 minutes. Okay, cool. Those of you that are over 6 years, I have no insight for you. Those of you that are beneath 5 years, and especially beneath 1 year, please ask questions. And if we run out of time today, then, I see some more familiar faces. This is good. Then just catch me outside the room. I'll be glad to spend time with you. I don't have another commitment today. That's kind of cool. All right, let's go back to the presentation. Thank you for that. Okay, so what I want to talk about is first the landscape of product lifecycle management. It's confusing, and I find that people got to understand, well, as a PLM leader, how did you get this thing organized? Applying knowledge, I'll get to how we came up with that term, but what's important is how do you orchestrate product development? How do you learn from failures like Sanjay was talking about and make your product better? In fact, you'd like to make it active, right? This is an interesting notion. What happened at General Motors and why? I'll touch on that. I was noticing all the faces that I know in the room, and so there are a lot of them in the room, the GM team, that are still at GM, and I'm sure they can provide other insight if I can't answer your question. But what's interesting is the variety, and that's what I want to get to at the end, and then I'll give you my conclusions. So here we go. So does this look familiar to anybody? And to those of you that know Stefan Doiling, Stefan, of course, was a part of our operation in Europe that is now part of a different car company. But he and I were co-leads over a decade ago, and he drew this picture to try and describe some of the complexities of a larger corporation. And so you have in the front there the CAD tools and the PDM tools. That's NX and Teamcenter Automotive Edition back in the day. But that's not what we do for a living. What we do for a living is manufacture cars, and that's over on the right-hand side. There's that thing called MGO. That's where we manufacture. That's where we build lots of cars. That's where General Motors makes money, right? So what's all the other stuff? Well, there's simulation that's on the other side of that highway. You can see Nastran, you can see visualization, you can see the versions of tools that we chose. That's kind of the future, that's the cool stuff, right? And then there's also other boxes, and they're boxes, they're not integral, which is kind of frustrating. You've got manufacturing, lower right-hand corner, but then you've got this tower that's really the product plan and the parts plan and all the supply chain stuff, and it's much more complicated than one tower. But we put it as one tower here. What are those other buildings? Well, there's business systems. How do we make choices? How do we release? There's issues management. That's the thing in the back. And so I suspect a lot of large companies, especially over the last 25, 30 years, grew up in this environment, grew up where the silos were developed, partly because of IT technology, partly for other things. Every now and then, a direct interface was built from the modern world, the virtual world, if you will, right into the manufacturing world, and that's what that monorail is. It was kind of futuristic. It was kind of cool. Also, it was short-lived. I mean, we still use it today, I think, but in fact, something better needs to be there. And it was very special purpose, and it was expensive to build. So instead, people started using this Excel highway that's in between. It's a highway that comes from nowhere and goes nowhere, but it's integral to your business. If you hear that, that's a real problem, right? If you're exchanging all your information in somebody's Excel spreadsheet, chances are it's not under revision control, it's not part of a configuration. It may be in a PowerPoint deck that the chief engineer approved, but it probably isn't reflective of the actual state of the design. It's stale, it's out of date. So if you're the PLM leader and you get this assignment, and Stefan and I are sitting there going, well, what do we do with this mess? And we come from the left-hand side of this picture, to be clear. Part of what we talked about is, well, you need to be able to make decisions based upon information from multiple silos. At different points in time, you need to make different decisions, right? And so these planes of knowledge that you want to show together is what's in our mental model. And of course, it can occur anywhere at any time. And why do you do this? You do it just so you make better decisions. And better really means lower risk, or you manage the risk, okay? We all build products that our moms and dads and brothers and sisters use, and we want to make sure that they're very reliable, right? At the time, so get out your cameras, this is a cute picture. Does anybody remember this cell phone, right? This is one of the first tablet things over 13 years ago, I think. And I said, well, what we need is a PLM handheld device so that I don't ever have to think about any of these silos, but instead I can think about the knowledge in one of those planes when I need to make a decision. Everybody with me? Okay. But then something else happened. In addition to the technology silos, then you get organizational complexity. Some of that's driven by the technology, right? Some of it's just driven by governance practice of corporations, from finance to supply chain to manufacturing, right? So all we're trying to point out is as a PLM leader, you have to figure out how to bridge all these different organizational complexities as well as the technology complexities. Of course, we have a process. Just in all manufacturing, you have a process. You know the flow, you know where the constraints are. You get better at managing the constraints. Engineering and even finance and marketing, they're no different. They have a process. They have workflow. Somehow it has to be knit all together. Somehow you learn from these things and you apply it. And you've got major component like an engine or a transmission. It's one phase ahead of the vehicle just because major subsystems have to be ready before the rest of it can be plugged together. One last thing of complexity. And then there's all this embedded software. And there's more and more of it every day. And all of these numbers, for those of you that are trying to do intelligence on General Motors, have been expressed multiple times in public and are now about 5 years old. So just the number of features in a car, the number of things you interact with when a car is driving down the road is just going up exponentially. So Wendy, who's in the back, she and I put together this cartoon a few years ago to try to describe to management what kinds of PLM initiatives we would need. If you're that PLM leader, there was a couple of you in the room, you really need a cartoon to help talk to the upper management to explain, well, where do we want to invest and so on. And it's kind of straightforward. Let's just read through it real quick. There's requirements, meaning this is what the marketplace wants. There's constraints. This is what we can afford to build, okay? There's early product definition. How much of the product are we going to reuse from a previous product? So the green stuff means complete reuse. The red stuff means redesign it for whatever reason. Yellow is somewhere in between. And then you put together your design while you're designing the refinement, all virtually, by the way. Eventually, you build a physical product. You start putting it on the track. You do some tuning. You validate it. And then you start mass production. and then it goes into service. And then after, well, anymore, 10, 15 years, the car comes out of service and somehow it's recycled. I want to point out the 3 swim lanes at the bottom. In all of this product cycle, there's regulatory things, that's the gray bar at the bottom. There's manufacturing practice. I mean, we are manufacturing companies. We make our living out of building things that we can mass produce. And of course, all of it takes investment, and you got to understand your supply chains and all the rest of that. So as the PLM leader, I wanted to take this model and explain to the leadership, well, first, we got to get consistent product data. It's pretty inconsistent because of all the number of silos on the previous cartoon. We also ought to have an integrated change process. In that other picture, there was something called the business systems. There was one tower, if you will, for release management. That's great. That's a good step in the right direction. However, it applied only to the middle part, the kind of white part of this. It didn't apply broader than that. And so how do we do integrated change across the whole life cycle? I said that's how we were going to get to integrated PLM tools. Notice it's plural. Notice it's not one. And also this feedback path that I kind of glossed over before, that's where knowledge comes from. Be they failures in the field, failures during development, insights on early product definition, or even requirements that can't be met. The classical tool guy or gal says, oh yeah, I got requirements management, just put it all in there, it'll work. Okay? Well, there's some fundamental reasons why that doesn't work, and I think it's one of the reasons I'm here today is to share that with you. So, you want integrated PLM tools, how do we get there? We came up with themes, and this is part of lesson number 1 today. You should figure out your themes. We decided, and this is a few years old now, connect people. People want to be connected, whether it be through a social platform or through a conversation. Visualize it, well, we are all building products, right? A car, something you interact with. It's hard to visualize embedded software, but if you can experience it, that's a form of visualization, then you can see its behavior. And most importantly, you want to apply knowledge. And so as Tim and I, and then Tim and I and Ron, and then more, as we worked with Jeff and his company and others, I realized more and more that this term knowledge, it shouldn't be knowledge management. It should be the application of knowledge. There should be a verb there so that we apply knowledge, okay? Okay. So we created PLM. PLM had already been created before we came along. We just branded it inside the company and taught leadership about it. And then we had these 3 themes. By the way, themes do change over time. That's a different lecture for a different day. For right now, I want to remind you that we had these 3 themes for quite a while. And when I retired, these were still 3 themes. And in particular, we're going to talk about apply knowledge. Like anything in this business, there's always a product development cycle. This is a typical one of a car. It's not unique to General Motors. But you always have more ideas than you can possibly fund. And so the trick is, how do you figure out which ideas to invest in? Again, portfolio management's not my topic today, but if you can have your people with ideas, put them in the context of your themes, then you can begin to do a better job of choosing which projects to work on. Auros especially really fits into the apply knowledge, and we'll stress that here again. Early on, when Stefan and I first presented to our 2 sponsoring directors, a third one from manufacturing said, you know, what you really want is just the right information to just the right people at just the right time. So think about that for a moment. How do you know who the right people are? Well, that's role management probably. What about the right information? Well, that's the part you're responsible for and maybe everything it touches. And then if there's regulations on it, a safety regulation or other, maybe that is important too. What about just the right time? Well, you've got to have a process, a piece of music, a symphony score of how product development proceeds, okay? So let's go there for a minute. So so now I just want to talk about the 1 theme, apply knowledge. If you want to hear about connect or visualize, I don't know, Google it. You might find a presentation on visualize out there in the ecosphere. So let's talk about apply knowledge. Orchestration of product development is one of the topics, and then how does knowledge become active? Jeff shared this definition with me. I absolutely agree with it. For those of you that are not familiar, let me read it to you. Knowledge management is the framework structure of relationships, roles, processes is really important, technologies, and governance that an organization puts in place that allows knowledge to be treated as a common asset, and which allows relevant know-how, insight, and experience from others to be accessed and applied to business problems. Okay, so there's a couple key things in there. The discovery of knowledge, the recording of knowledge, but most importantly, the application of it. How do you figure out, how do you easily apply knowledge? The Auros team uses the term provision. How do you do that consistently? How do you do that well? At SimData, part of our business is we write these 3- and 4-page commentaries on technology. We do it for everybody. And we did one for Auros, and here are the key takeaways we captured. So this gets peer reviewed inside of SimData, here was our conclusions. First and foremost, knowledge has to be easy to capture. The last thing you want is somebody that has a test failure, and then they got to go into the CAD system and figure out how to decorate it on the proper parts, which might be great for the current product, but it's terrible for the next product, right? And so this notion of associating insight and associating the test failure with the next set of products is important. How do you apply it to those future products? Whose job is it to apply it to the future products, right? Knowledge must be applied throughout product life cycles and is often viewed in a comparative way. Here in the car business, we build lots of the same stuff and we've been doing it for 100 years, right? So part of the trick is whether it's a peer review, which Chris is going to talk about later today, field failures, other kinds of reviews, knowledge is applied all the time, right? These PLM, PDM, ALM, application lifecycle management, so where embedded software is done, systems manage resulting designs throughout a product cycle. They're very good at that. But knowledge is longer than that. Knowledge can be applied over multiple product cycles. This is one of the reasons I think the PLM and PDM vendors fail, is because they're treating knowledge just like another object that you put in a bomb and off you go. Well, I think it gets applied differently than that. And that's part of the other insight. And so knowledge has a life cycle. Knowledge does become obsolete. You change material, you change your practice, maybe the knowledge is no longer applicable. You got to have a way to turn the knowledge off to say we don't have to look at that anymore because we don't use that technique or that material anymore. So this, you can get a hold of this commentary. The folks at Emergent have it. The folks, if you go to the SimData site, you can Google the words like knowledge active and you'll find it. Okay, so let me talk for a moment about process orchestration. So at the highest level, there's a series of milestones that people go through. And we created this thing called the vehicle process of engineering, the steps you go through. Turns out it can be more than engineering, it can be any process, right? And you have these big swim lanes, and all car companies have them, from architecture to styling, to engineering, to validation, to manufacturing tool launch, to start mass production. And you have these milestones along the way that help guide you, okay? That's really high level. This is good for maybe the chief engineer. If you're the part person, the person that has to develop a part, this is way too high level. Instead, for just a snippet of one of these parallel paths, you have a series of steps you go through, and the steps, in a sense, are reminders of what you need to do next, or what you do in what order. And also, while we're here, wouldn't it be cool if you could status on the steps? Green, in this case, meaning finished. Gray, meaning to be done and on schedule, just isn't due yet. Yellow to mean we're having a little bit of trouble, might be late. Red is another choice. You are late, and there's no recovery plan. So this is how you get process orchestration. This is a form of knowledge, what to do in what order, okay? And why not put the status in the context? We'll call that a vehicle program. If you're the chief engineer, you want to look across hundreds of these and see where things are at. Well, one of the things we use Auros for is best practices and checklists. And I'm not here to tell you the details of that. You've heard that in previous years. But I just want to put it in the context of this process orchestration. So if you're a part engineer and you've got to do these boxes that are green or maybe the ones that are still clear, you need a reminder what to do. Sanjay talked about the beginning of checklist and a flight pre-check after the Wright brothers disaster in 1908, I believe it was. This is where design checklist is. This is a job aid for you as the engineer, okay? Wendy shared this with you, I think, 2 years ago, and I don't want to, again, go through it. I just want to remind you, this poor release engineer has to deal with their part probably in multiple products. So if you thought there was one timeline, sorry, it's more complicated than that. There's multiple timelines. I'll come back to that in a minute. And so all of these things have some suggestions, some recommendations, some steps to go through to make sure you do your FMEA, to deal with issues management, whether it's a visual issue management, a mock-up thing, or whether it came from manufacturing startup or even worse would be something from the field. Okay. Another important thing is, well, what are all the deadlines? Who has the master timing card, right? When I first started at GM, I used to get these printed cards once a month, and if you knew your part, you could look up the part and which product you were on, and you could tell what the master timing was, right? This is how you orchestrate the symphony, the business of developing a new car. You've seen method K-Packs, right? This is to remind you what to do in one of those green stop boxes I showed you before. This one's on FMEAs and design reviews and apply a best practice. But then when you instantiate that method pack into a program, then those flags become tied to particular dates. Particular dates come from another system, right? A planning system, if you will. Again, I'm not going to talk about K-Packs and team boards, but they're really essential. They're a cool way for people to work together. Team boards encourage on-time delivery of the work and the beginning of these things we call peer reviews. So I'm releasing a controller, someone else is releasing an embedded controller. We're on different times, but we're going to learn stuff about how controllers are manufactured, how controllers are best sourced, and so on, whether they come from Bosch or Delphi or Continental or whoever. And there was a time in my life I did that. Okay, I gave you a trick about peer reviews. Well, these green milestones, every now and then, or maybe it's the diamonds, you have to go have somebody else review your work, right? You can't just say, oh, I did the checklist, trust me, boss. You also get somebody else to sign off. So peer reviews are at a broader level, typically tied to those blue milestones, right? And by the way, it's purposeful that you cannot read any of the detail in these things, so don't try. And this was a snapshot from a few years ago. I wouldn't dare show you the current one. And I'm sure we view it as secret anyways. You want to know more about peer reviews? Check later today in the afternoon. Okay, I want to share one more with you. If you're a chief engineer of a platform, so like large-sized cars, you might have several products. They might have slightly different timing. Notice they don't line up. You might even have one that's shorter because we're going to bring it to market quicker. Same steps, accelerated timeline. And then maybe you got another one that's longer because it's got new technology on it, like battery packs and electric motors instead of internal combustion engines. Okay, and then you're sitting there and you're going, okay, how come 5 of my programs are fine and 1 is not? I want to be able to figure out what's gone haywire in that one program. Is it a physics thing? Is there a requirement that's just that unique? Or is it just poor execution? The Challenger was too cold for the O-rings. The O-rings wouldn't expand. They wouldn't fill the gap. The gas got out the gap. This is ridiculously sad, right? So as a chief, you want to be able to do this read across to be able to say, hey, what's going on? And in particular, if it's just a schedule thing, that a little bit of relief would let you get rid of the risk because you know on the other 5 products it's just fine. Cool, let's do a read across, right? Let's compare, and yes, it's painful to change timing, but maybe that's the right way to manage this risk, is change the timing of the one program, the one product that has a bit of a red problem, whatever that problem might be. So back to our cartoon, you know, applying knowledge, we all talk about lessons learned and feedback and so on, but I just want to emphasize you've got to fix these other things as well as then really have a knowledge gain strategy. And one of the things we found interesting over time, and I'm going to share in a little bit the evolution of what kind of use cases. I forced a lot of people, some of them are in the room, to throw it back into requirements. And I was surprised at the number of times we came back and said, nope, Auros is a better place for it. And so I want to leave you, as we go through the rest of this, with why did that happen? Why couldn't I put this knowledge gain back in requirements? Why did it always come back to something else? Okay, let's go. So let's talk about the growth at GM. How did that actually happen? So first, my fault. Looks pretty impressive, huh? Well, the first 4 years really was small, and there weren't many of us. There was a handful of us, a couple of us are in the room. But it was interesting, we were doing it mostly as a, well, it surprised me. I was new to this job, and it surprised me back in that 2006, 2007, that the Siemenses, well, it wasn't the Siemens then, it was Unigraphics, but that the tool vendors hadn't figured this out and hadn't already addressed it. And so, like the new Dilbert boss, I said, well, let's go force them to do it, right? I can distinctly remember a review we had at one of these aerospace working groups, and Ford was there and GM was there. It was interesting. And we explained to the Team Center leadership why it was so important we have this kind of user experience. And they just disagreed with us and said, well, no, that's wrong. Well, I would tell you that this decision they made back in that 2008 and 9 time frame is what led to this growth, right? Because the reason it works is because people like it. And the vertical axis is number of distinct users. So it's not frequency, it's just number of unique IDs, okay? Frequency is it's geometric, it's even higher. So this is sort of a summary, and again, a couple of them I was involved in directly, those are the bold ones. Another one you're going to hear about today, that's the italics one close to the bottom. All I wanted to point out is look at the variety. And you would say, well, some of those sound like requirements. Yeah, that's fair, some of them do. But let me use manufacturing rules and best practice as an example. We debated this for months about, is that a manufacturing requirement or is that a manufacturing best practice? And I said, well, is it the way we run our plants or is it something unique to the product? Oh, it's the way we run our plants. I said, then it's a best practice and a rule, it's not a requirement. So one of the distinctions is that requirements are things that are unique to the product. They're driven by the marketplace. They're not driven by your manufacturing maturity, okay? But it is a form of requirement. Oh yeah, class. If you were building a rocket ship and you were being paid by the Department of Defense, you would use COSI and SysML, and you would put it in as a requirement. But then you don't have an existing mass production best practice. You probably don't, right? Whereas in the car business, well, that's what we all make money on, right? Is knowing what those best practices are. So this distinction of what's a rule, what's a piece of knowledge versus what's a requirement is one of the things that really surprised me over the years. And when I pushed teams to requirements and they came back and said, you know, it's just too hard to use. I can't go to 3 weeks of Team Center training, blah, blah, blah. I said, well, then let's try this other thing that Wendy and the team now own, and that's what led to a lot of that growth. And there's probably more that I haven't captured. And I think the lesson you should take from us is when you're interested in seeing this kind of growth in your company, there's lots of people here from GM, there's Tim's from Caterpillar now, he used to be with us. There's a lot of people that have experience on this kind of a growth. Go talk to them and understand why. I'll tell you it's this distinction between requirements and knowledge. They're not the same thing. It's really important that you figure that out. Okay. So active management works. That's why the organic growth is there. Active management. Management that comes to you, or excuse me, knowledge that comes to you. Knowledge that's in context, knowledge that's timely, knowledge that's relevant, right? And it's a reasonable size. You can consume it quickly, right? One of the benchmarking studies that they did on Toyota years ago on the Toyota production system was how did they capture this hunk of insight that all of their engineers used, right? Well, they had requirements that it had to be in 2 pages or 1 page or less. Otherwise, it wasn't indexable, it wasn't usable. Interesting piece of insight, manageable chunk. Authoring ease, well, I think we all get that. The provisioning ease is the thing that always amazes me. How easy is it to apply this 1 and 2 pages of knowledge to something else, right? In a world where you have an associative database and you have objects in your database and you're supposed to put them in a BOM and then you associate them, well, if there's a mechanical connection, a geometric connection, it's kind of straightforward. If there's a behavioral connection, it's less straightforward, but you can begin to say, oh yeah, in order for the cruise control to work, we got to have this series of sensors, actuators, and control algorithm. What about the knowledge that says, you know, cruise control in heavy traffic area doesn't really work very well? Oh, do we add more sensors? Do we just tell the operator to turn it off? Do we have a radar that turns it off for you now? That's what's coming with things like Super Cruise. So I think the provisioning ease is way under talked about. It should be talked about a lot more. It's one of the things we pointed out in our commentary. This is usually administered by the engineering side, not by the IT side. So there's something here for the IT folks in the room. You really do want this because you're probably not the process expert. There's somebody in engineering that's the process expert, and processes change over time. And the last thing you want is for your IT to be the constraint on changing processes. Processes is part of the secret sauce. It's part of how you stay competitive. Early on, at that initial 4 years, we did design automation. So, and for those of you that are not in the car business, packaging problems are always a pain in the butt. Like, where do we route the oil dip tube, right? You need one so that you can look at how much oil's in the engine, but it always comes late. You're worried about the engine and the chassis fitting together. The last thing you want to worry about is some plumbing, right? So there's an example. There was a regulatory example on wipers, and in the United States at least. I'm sure it's true in other countries. You ever wonder why we don't have one wiper blades in the United States? It's this rule. There's a motor vehicle safety standard rule that says you got to remove 80, I think it's 88% of the surface. So if you got a window this big, 88% has to be removed by wipers. You can't do it with one. You got to have two. Well, how do you package all of that? That's what I mean by packaging. Mechanically, reliably, and so on. Well, wouldn't it be cool if you just put the key parameters, the shape of the windshield, the technology you have for wipers, push the magic button and let it figure out, auto design, if you will, the wiper system. Everybody loved it because it was always on the critical path. It was always in the way, right? And it's tedious to design this thing, so automate it. And this is 2 examples. There's many examples. Orchestration of product development. I touched on process steps. I touched on the linkage of the work instructions inside of a step being able to access knowledge, the knowledge being applied in a timely manner based upon that sequence of steps. And then peer reviews, read across. Conducting a review with the ability to see a team board is much more productive than a bunch of people putting PowerPoint slides up. Much more productive. And that's you know, over the years, we've had reviews and debates with Jeff and his team, and the way that has evolved is largely car companies saying, and it's not just GM, saying, you know, this is how we run a team review. We're looking for the key things, the blockers to our progress. We're looking for key risks areas. Last time we did this was the risk area. Well, what's the reminder of those things? It's a knowledge pack. And then there's systems engineering, the systems view, the amount of complexity going into cars and the infrastructure to support things like autonomous is just growing rapidly. It's part of why we put in that organizational complexity and feature complexity chart. And guess what? Again, I said, push it back into requirements, and multiple areas have come back and said, you know, for interface agreements, or what system engineering might call ICDs, interface control documents, it's just easier, for at least for a mass producer, to put it into Auros. And it's just starting, and I haven't been there in a while, so you'll have to ask Wendy where else system engineering is going, assuming she wants to talk about it. Okay, conclusions, I think, yes. Okay, active management works, okay? Active knowledge management works. It helps if you have a theme that drives home this point, right? Our theme was apply knowledge. Ron is back here. Ron and I used to be in the same team, and we debated forever. Oh, let's call it knowledge management. And it was a few months of debate. And we came back to apply knowledge to emphasize the importance of the action, right? Make it relevant at the right time, right? That's not easy to do. It's easy to talk about. It's not easy to do, okay? In order to have themes like apply knowledge, you also have to have a compelling vision, and this is ours. We want to be able to dynamically configure anything, a product, a knowledge, or whatever, by anyone, whatever your role is, but do it in context at any time, wherever we are in the product cycle. There's other technology coming, visualization technology, product configuration technology, even managing of knowledge technology that will make this real. This compelling vision has been with us almost a decade now. Visions shouldn't change often. Themes should change a little bit based upon changing business conditions. The rest of the story is you should have processes. You should have them documented. How could you possibly do re-engineering of your process if you don't know your baseline? Okay, and there are other tools that help with that, but those tools combined with what we do at Auros helps you streamline processes. If people, let's use an example, if people have a piece of knowledge and they keep going through the reviews and it never ever uncovers anything, you might just say, well, maybe we're done. Maybe we should just put that into the archive, put it in the encyclopedia, we have focus teams, remind the focus team, hey, there's this other knowledge pile, but we no longer need to make it active because we're really good at it. It's become second nature of the organization. This is the point about there is a life cycle to knowledge. There's a time when you don't have to make it as active as it once was, but it's good to remember. You don't want to forget. I can't emphasize ease of use enough, not just authoring. Almost all tool vendors worry about authoring. What they should worry more about is use. In other words, the ability to access the information, the ability to easily, what the word provision I really like, but I didn't create it, the folks at Jeff's team created it, right? Ease of use. If you're a tool person or an IT person, you may hate me saying it over and over. Don't say, oh yeah, that thing from Dassault just does it really well. Well, it means it can do it. It doesn't mean that it does it efficiently. If you're in a large car company, this matters a lot, right? And users not being happy with the way the user experience works is one of the surest ways to slow down your PLM implementation plans. And finally, let's have some themes. What are themes really for? They drive constancy of purpose. You always have, at least in existing companies, you always have more ideas than you have money or time. And so how do you choose? One of the hardest things I had to do was figure out what to choose. It helps if you have themes. It helps if they're consistent. It helps if everybody learns to talk about their idea in terms of the themes. Okay, and Auros is one of the best at this theme about apply knowledge. Not just recording, but also provisioning. So active knowledge management works. These are some of the reasons. When you want to know more, my contact information's here, but it's likely you'll get more current information from any of the GM attendees today, or Tim's here from Caterpillar. There's a couple other faces I recognize. So I appreciate your attention. Thank you. If you want me to take a question or two, I can. Okay. Here we go. Okay. When will the strike end? I have no freaking idea. Okay, let's get that one off the table. Other questions about almost anything? Yeah.
Oh, come on. Here we go.
How do you manage the length of the checklist? So when you get all these lessons learned, best practices, it becomes really long.
Oh, no, that's a good point. We have this team structure, which is cross products. So it's a particular domain like body and white, okay? But there'll be more senior folks, experienced folks. Part of their assignment is to look at the checklist and decide what parts of the checklist are no longer useful. right? I think another thing they do is sometimes the checklists were really good when you introduced something new, like a new material or a new way of bending metal or forming plastic or whatever. Well, maybe you want to go back in the archive and look at the old checklist, even though it's really long, but there would be a single person that would go do that and then bring it back to the cross-functional team to say, well, because we're using a new material, or as we all go global, or we've gotten that same material, but it's now coming from a different region of the world, maybe we should go back and do the broader checklist. Active management, it's important the checklist get back to a small, manageable chunk. So my point is, it's just work, and you've got to make it somebody's job. It needs to be somebody experienced that can look at it and make a judgment call, right? The car business is doing more and more battery stuff, right? The batteries are new technology to cars. I mean, we've been doing lead acid forever, but what knowledge, what process detail do you have? One of the things that when I talk about the process modeling stuff, it's interesting to look at the level of detail. The mature technologies, the stuff we've been, iron blocks for engines we've been doing for a long time, those checklists get pretty small and the process steps shrink. But the number of process steps for something brand new, lithium-ion batteries applied in vehicles or solid-state batteries, some people are talking about, those checklists, not surprisingly, are big because we're learning really fast. And they're probably onerous for the first few years, but then they start to shrink. So as an analyst of the system, look at how those change shape and size compared to your quality data. And you'll see as your quality starts to improve, the checklist can start to shrink, right? Now, I hope I didn't lose anybody. It's an active job. It's a full-time job, probably. And so I hope that helped. Other questions?
Okay, one over here.
Is it on? Okay. So organizational question. When you show the user trend chart, the 4-year, I'll call it incubation period, looking back on that, suggestions on how to shorten that?
Oh, a startup would help, but no, I'm serious, right? I mean, make it visible. No, let me answer. So what helped us was making it visible. The CAD guys were all over it. They're like, oh, cool, I don't have to do these wipers anymore. We'll just do this instead, right? And so after the first couple programs, then the first knee in the curve was doing it for all programs. So part of it is proof that it works and then apply it across multiple products. Another part of it is keep an open mind. This is where Wendy and Christine and crew have done a really good job. Keep an open mind. When the PLM leader, I said, do your manufacturing rules in requirements. They did, they followed orders. It was over a year, I think. They came back and said, this isn't working. Well, what's our other idea? So our leadership team planning, we said, well, we know Auros works over here, let's try it there. So don't be afraid to try things is the other way you increase it. If the insight I have now, instead of waiting a year, I might do it in over 3 months, right? Turn your trials on whatever tool technology you're using into shorter periods. Don't go for a year, go for 3 months. And then share. I mean, there's nothing secret that we're using Auros at General Motors. What's surprising to a lot of people, Jeff and I were talking about this a little bit, why haven't the PLM vendors figured it out? Lots of reasons, including this user use. The use side of it is something that just is way underestimated how important it is. So I hope that helps. I think you can shorten it. Sometimes you don't want to shorten it too much. I mean, candidly, if you don't have processes documented, you'll confuse yourself if you shorten it too much. So I'm a big believer in lean and process modeling and knowing where your constraints really are. The wiper thing, the oil tube thing, everybody hated those jobs. So getting it assigned to an automatic tool was easy. Automating other things that might be somebody's specialty, that's a bit harder. You get a lot of resistance, right? And at some point, you just have to choose somebody somewhere in the company. Well, it worked over there, so there's no reason why it wouldn't work over here. And ultimately, that comes to a leadership thing, right? So how am I doing? MZ? Oh, 2 more, okay. Others?
Yeah,
oh, no, you can't ask questions because never mind. Go ahead, what do you want to know?
So, yeah, I just had a question. So you
When
talked
will
a
the
lot about
taggers run?
process.
I have no idea about that either, by the way.
For-
What's your evidence? It's not the bench, that's for sure. So go ahead.
No, but you talk a lot about process, and how do you respond to when people say that process prohibits innovation or creativity, where process gets in the way and we need our people to be able to make their own decisions and improvise, which was another thing you kind of talked about?
In my experience, the best answer is to have that debate in the focus team. Peers getting together and saying, really, is the process really that onerous? As opposed to management shoving it down the throat of the people, right? For those of you that think the process is onerous, there's usually a good reason for every step. It would be good for you to research and understand why. Why do we do FMEAs? Well, so that you don't have shuttle disasters, right? I'm sure I know the guys at Morton Tycall. It's now it's Northrop Grumman. They got consumed by another company. Those guys would tell you, we did all the work. We followed all the checklists. It's just that the people making decisions about getting a teacher into space decided that was more important, and then we killed a lot of people. So if your process is onerous and nobody can defend the process, then it's time to do process reengineering. And a lot of people just don't want to do it because it's heavy lifting and a lot of work, but in reality, it's your secret sauce for your company, right? What I found interesting about process is the innovation point. The people that innovated the most, like electric motors and batteries in my last few years at GM, they had the most detailed knowledge packs and processes. Isn't that interesting? So maybe the person arguing they can't innovate is not focused on the business. They're innovating. Okay, great, I got a new way to make the leather feel good. Great, where's your consumer data that says that's important? As I understand it from my sons, they're in their 30s. They don't care about that stuff. Oh, well, then maybe the person that wants to innovate there is just not relevant. Either go find a different technology or a different company or whatever. So the best place to have this debate is not individual, you and I. It's to have it with peers and for the peers to trust each other. You know, team structure and governance and how you manage a large company, team structure matters a lot. And the same is true for tools and processes. Having joint teams of business people, IT people, different perspectives, right? The electronics perspective, the mechanical perspective, it's all important. And then leadership, and this would be my advice to managers, if you hear more than once a week somebody's bringing up this process is onerous, you know, it's time to sit the process leader down and say, hey, we got to re-look at this. Maybe it is onerous, right? We did it at a time where we were twice the size we currently are. Maybe it doesn't matter anymore. Have a discussion. That's the punchline. Okay? No, you can't ask a question. Well, you got to turn your mic on.
Okay, here we go.
Do you need a K-Pack?
Yeah, probably need some instruction.
I saw you do that 3 times.
Yeah, it had a little delay in it. In some of our conversations, relevant to what you were just talking to about, you pushed or you suggested to the manufacturing folks that they go use another tool. Mm-hmm. Part of another alternative as a PLM leader would be to customize tools to create the missing pieces or missing functionality that may be not available out of the box, but can be customized into the tool, assuming you know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Can you share some of your views on what you thought as a PLM leader about adding that kind of content to the existing tools through customization?
Yeah, so we have to go one level deeper, right? So, and I won't use words custom or configurable at the beginning. I will at the end. There's stuff that takes a long time because either you're not skilled or because it's complicated. There's stuff you can do pretty quickly because it's cut and paste or click and here you go. And so the time to value in both of those cases is really different, right? And then there's a third one that just says, well, shoot, why not use the one out of the box? I don't go to Sears and, well, whoever builds tools anymore and make my own tools from raw materials. I go buy a set of wrenches. In fact, I buy multiple wrenches. If I don't like what one set does, I'll try a different brand. So all of those are a time to value. How long does it take before I get the value? The person who says, I got to have a custom tool because that's all I know how to do, I only like wrenches a certain way, blah, 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 blah. Well, if that turns out to be the secret to your company, it might be worth building custom tools. But there aren't very many secrets, not in mass production companies, right? New materials is one area, embedded software, certain features is another area where there really are secrets, right? But how you bend metal, how you form plastic, 3D printing for a little bit will be like this. It'll be a bunch of secret stuff. And then it'll become mainstream and, over probably a decade, it'll happen really quickly. So as a company, you got to decide how much is customization, the stuff that takes a long time, configurable, stuff that maybe an engineer could configure, but they're not an IT expert, and stuff you just say, team, let's learn how to use the commercial tool because it's just the quickest thing. And this isn't, another way to look at this is if you're catching up, if your competition's ahead of you, you ought to probably just use the commercial tool because you're catching up, right? You're really arrogant and misplaced arrogance if you think you can customize your way out of an uncompetitive situation. So I think it's all of these things matter. And to the weaker leadership that says, oh, I got to customize everything just because I don't know how to tell my people to do something, get new leaders. I mean, candidly, that's just, there's plenty of companies out there that are using the commercial tools, yours and others, off the shelf. When they make it theirs, they really prefer configuration, not customization. This conference I was at a few weeks ago out in San Diego, this very topic came up. And it was interesting. The tool vendors blamed the OEMs because we were doing too much customization. I just share that with you because I found it an interesting debate, I sat there listening as a retiree and I'm like, yeah, I know examples where that's exactly the case, too much, right? So being an analyst, well, what happened there? Apparently money was free and time was free. Because if there was a time constraint or a financial constraint, you wouldn't have done it that way. And then one last caution on customization. Well, if you're going to do it, you better be good at it. And there are software companies, there's all kinds of maturity scales out there. If you're going to do custom software, then you'd better be a level 4 or level 5 company. If you're not a level 4 or level 5 company, CMMI levels, go look it up, don't do custom software. You're not skilled at it. You'll just mislead everybody. So the leadership, PLM leadership especially, you got to be cognizant of your capability to build custom software, and don't do it. If I could rule the world, I'd tell everybody the only time you do custom software is when you are absolutely convinced it's a competitive advantage, and you don't want the world to know you can do it. How many of those do you really have? Especially the car business. I mean, new technology maybe, but nothing else, right? So I hope that helps. I'll be glad. I'm here all day. I'll be glad to chat with people more. I am at SimData. You can find me. I am retired, though, which means it's got to be an interesting problem or I won't work on it. Thanks, Joe.
Awesome. Thank you. I think that's why we all came, right? That was a great talk. Thank you. Quickly, the SimData report that Mr. Brown did is going to be emailed to everybody. So you can look forward to receiving that.